Hello, and welcome back to Surviving to Thriving for Highly Sensitives. I am your guide and your host, Tammy Goen, high sensory coach. And I'm just here to help you move beyond the struggle of overwhelm and feeling like you need to be different or fixed to really thriving by embracing your trait, feeling comfortable in your own skin, and being able to celebrate all of the amazing things that come from being highly sensing. And today we're going to talk a bit about boundaries, and specifically boundaries related to relationships. So it's really easy to make a lot of assumptions about how we need to be in relationship. And it can be really challenging for those of us who are highly sensing and have a lot of expectations for ourselves as well as for our relationships. So let's talk first about, energy, as we're pulling in all kinds of energy all the time. This does relate to our ability to have harmonious relationships. So if we look at, we have different types of energy, and we're usually picking up on all of this energy all the time. So we have those who have really positive, if you will, have really helpful energy for us, where we feel really buoyed by people. I'm sure you have people in your circle who, when you spend time with them, you just feel so uplifted. You just have a really great time. And even if you're doing something, talking for hours or doing some kind of activity that uses up your energy, by the time you're done, you actually feel energized because of that energy of that person and the energy created with the two of you. So that's always awesome. And trying to maximize that is really great. Then we have people who have some kind of energy that for us is just kind of neutral. It doesn't really seem to add much to your life or to things in that moment, but it's not really pulling anything from you either. It's something that we just don't, really have to think about. And then we do have those who have some kind of an effect on us that is very draining, that will actually deplete us. And it's good to, if you just take a moment right now and think about the people in your life and how many people would be in that category of draining. And of course, I'm sure you've heard the term an energy vampire. We can even kind of break that down a little bit, though, because there are people who are definitely oblivious of their effect on others and just are very demanding or needy, or maybe they're never quite happy with what we have to offer. Something's always going on that you just feel so drained after spending time with them. And sometimes it's a matter of, maybe you're frustrated or irritated by someone. And so that's going to pull out your energy. That's going to drain you. Maybe that's a different way of being that energy vampire. It's like, oh, whenever I'm around this person, I just am so tired by the time I walk away, I'm just depleted. I'm exhausted. And then sometimes that happens as a result of just not being aware of what's going on with that situation. But also, you've probably had this happen too. Maybe you have someone that you really do like, and you think that they're a really great person, but you'll have a conversation for, say, 30 minutes, and you get done at the end and you realize you might have said about 20 words, but that person has monopolized that conversation the entire time. They just talked nonstop. And just being in that listening role, when you have, either you're like holding your energy back, you have all these things you want to say, but you're listening and listening and listening, that can be really, really draining too. So it's really good to be aware, if nothing else, just aware of how different people affect us. And we might have a day where we feel kind of drained. And if we look and say, okay, who did I interact with today? And maybe it was someone that, a lot of someone's, but maybe one of those people is someone who really tends to drain your energy. And it's important to just be aware of that. And of course, in talking about energy before, I've mentioned how we can, create our boundaries or create our awareness and our intention of what we're going to do with energy and what we're allowing to come in. So we do have some responsibility in those ways to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to not take on somebody else's energy or not be affected as much. But the reality is there are those people who are just not a fit for us, and they're going to always be depleting our energy, no matter how hard we try to establish, those boundaries. So just being aware of that is really important, and recognizing that it is just the way it is sometimes, and not feel guilty for that. So we do have a tendency to not want anyone to have hurt feelings, to be disappointed, to be upset with us, to be frustrated with the situation. You know, we don't want to let anybody down. We just want everything to go smoothly. And it really is just not possible to make everything perfectly smooth all the time. But we can be trying for that all the time. We do tend to be, you know, perfectionistic, and we want to make things work just perfectly. We have that level of compassion, and we want it all to be just fine for everyone else. But it really is a big energy drain if we're always trying to do that, if we're always trying to help everyone else, make sure that they are all, you know, doing great and happy. And if we're not taking care of ourselves first, we're just going to deplete ourselves. And, you know, it's not a win-win, it's a lose-lose situation. In that case, I mean, we can put all of our energy into something that just drains us, and then we aren't really accomplishing what our goal is anyway, of making sure that they're, you know, happy and everything is going just fine, because we run out of bandwidth and we can't do that anymore. So it's really important to get back to that idea of really honoring ourselves, as I talked about last month, honoring who we are and what we need. What are our needs energetically? What are our needs in our relationships, so that we can honor those and be the person that we want to be with those relationships that we do choose to have. And so I do want to mention this too, you know, it's not our job, as I'm saying, you know, it's not our job to fix everything and to make sure everyone is okay. It's just not. I mean, it's not possible, and it's not our job. It is our job to try to do as much as we can to make sure that we are in a good place. So the other part of that, though, the flip side, is that we can't just say, you know, we don't get a free ride. We can't say, okay, I choose the, you know, the way out of saying I'm highly sensing, so, you know, you just need to accommodate me, or you need to just do things in a certain way so that it works for me, and not put your own work into it. I mean, relationships require work on both sides. They are, you know, a meeting of the minds. You know, everyone has their own viewpoint and their own needs, and it's important to acknowledge all of that and not just say, oh yeah, but I'm highly sensing, so you just need to do what works for me. So I do want to make sure that that's really clear, that it's not that we get like this, you know, this ticket to just do what we want and expect everyone to cater to us. We do need to take ownership for our part in every relationship, and what's not working, mistakes that we make, because we do make mistakes. Even though we might want to be perfect, we're going to certainly make mistakes, or we're going to say something that someone else takes it, you know, in a different way that wasn't intended. Just like we're used to people doing the same thing. You know, they'll say something and we think, wow, that was really hurtful. Well, maybe that wasn't hurtful in an intent anyway from that person. And if someone had said that same thing to them, it probably wouldn't be hurtful for them. So they just didn't realize that it could be hurtful for you. So recognizing that, you know, each person has those differences in viewpoints and how things affect them, what meaning they give to everything, right? When we give really a deep meaning to almost everything. And others don't necessarily do that. Some things are just like, it's no big deal. But for us, we tend to do that, you know, trying to figure out, what does that mean? You know, why did that person say that? And if we give it a certain meaning, then it's going to, you know, potentially feel not okay. It's going to feel hurtful or frustrating or whatever. So I just wanted to put that piece out there, because we do need to take responsibility for our own part in everything. And a lot of that just has to do with how, you know, learning how to share what we need and how we can resolve things with another, instead of assuming that person should just know what that is all about and figure you out without you explaining it yourself. So very, you know, just I'll come back to that, I'm sure, because it's a really key point. But one of the things that I do hear from clients who find me will say, you know, at the beginning, it's like, yeah, I really realize that I do become a doormat. I just let people walk over me because I don't set boundaries, and I just want everyone to be happy. So I'll say yes to everyone and everything. And as I've been explaining, that just doesn't work, because we can't resolve everything just right. And even if we're able in one situation to make everybody happy, and we're not, that's not going to, you know, sustain, and we're going to eventually not even want to participate in those things anymore, because we are just so depleted. And everything can change. So we can do our best to make everything just perfect. And then something can still happen, and it can be at unrest again. And then we're going to feel responsible for fixing that again. And that's so, so draining. So if you don't want to be a doormat and, feel like you're being taken advantage of, being stepped on, that your needs are not heard or understood or met, then the first step is setting a boundary and knowing first what you need, and then being able to say, okay, because of my needs, which is this, I am not okay with this, or I need to set this limit for this, example, this situation, this interaction with somebody, a conversation, whatever it is, being able to set that boundary and recognize that, and I'm sure you've heard this too, no is a complete sentence. And so sometimes if we are going to set a boundary or a limit, or we say no, we have this idea that we need to have this big, long discussion about why and how to get that person to understand where we're coming from and to validate exactly what we're feeling. And that we can't just say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. We have to have a reason. So we have to explain ourselves. We have to justify the fact that we've set a boundary. And we do not need to do that. Now, we come from things from, a compassionate place, as many people do. And we do want to say things in a reasonable way that comes across, as gently as possible. Perhaps if we're saying no to someone, we don't need to be rude about it or be angry about it. We can just say, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't work for me. And we don't need to go any farther, because that's just the way it is. And that person doesn't need to fix it for you, and you don't need to fix that situation. You can just say, this isn't working for me, and I need to say no. Or I've got so much on my plate, I can't take that one extra project. I'm sorry. You can say a few words if you want, but you really do not have to go into a long, in-depth explanation to justify your ability to say no. So I hope you'll hold on to that and go through that, many times. And if that's really foreign to you, that idea of being able to say no and just be okay with it and not have to explain it away, and give yourself that compassion, that self-honoring of saying, this is what I need. So it's okay to just say no. And we need to understand that if we do say no, someone, yes, might be disappointed. They might be frustrated with us. They might even be angry, but that's their experience. That's what they're going through. And if your intention is to not be hurtful, but to just support yourself, reinforce what you need, then you do that from a heartfelt place. And then you release what that result is going to be, knowing that that's their experience and they can do what they need to do to be okay with that. But you don't have to go, oh, okay, well, never mind. I don't want that person to be upset, so I'll say yes. It's gonna, just continue over and over, and then you're in that place of being that doormat, and it's just not sustainable if we're gonna, be taking care of ourselves to allow that to happen. So we do need to look at the idea of, different types of relationships that we have. There's things that are similar, across the board in relationships, but each one could be a little bit different. For example, if we're talking about family relationships, if we have options as friendships or romantic partners, to say, this isn't going to work for me, and I choose not to be with this person, we don't really have that choice so much with family, right? I mean, family is family. That's who we're born into. We have this family, right? So sometimes we have really great relationships in our families, and sometimes we do not. And so sometimes there are folks that we maybe can't get away from physically or emotionally because they're a tight part of our family. And so it's not just a matter of saying, this relationship doesn't work, I'm just going to choose not to be friends with this person. It's like, this is your family. So there are times when we have to recognize, what are the dynamics? Is the relationship just not healthy for you, or is it just irritating? And if it's really not healthy for you, then yes, there are going to be some steps that you'll want to take to minimize that contact. Sometimes people will even decide to break ties with their family because they've done a variety of things to try to make things work, and it's just not going to happen. And, some people just have certain energy or dynamics that just do not work for us. So sometimes that happens. Hopefully most of the time, if you're having those issues with family, you can learn to start setting those boundaries, maintaining those boundaries, and then seeing how that impacts the relationships, because it will change the dynamics. Whether it feels good at first or not is, a question, but being able to set what those limits are, or those boundaries within that family unit, is really, really important. So again, sometimes you can try and try and try, and it just doesn't work. And so you'll want to limit those interactions. Or maybe, you have a sibling that if this one particular topic comes up, you kind of guess where it's going to go, and it's just too stressful for you. Then, you can decide, it's like, I'm not going to bring that issue up with that person. And then that solves that issue. It doesn't resolve the whole dynamic, but you can make, where you do have a choice to make some changes and to have some control, great, you can do that. And otherwise, sometimes we do have to kind of just step back and say, okay, I can't pursue that with this person, or I need to minimize my contact with this person. But they are your family. So I do understand that that's a completely different scenario than someplace where you have a complete choice. So when we're talking about, say, romantic partners, we obviously have a choice. If people are married, for most people, there is that choice of not being married anymore. So ultimately, there's the big choice. But there's also, time away from each other, or time to, have, in any relationship, it's good for each person to have their own space and their own downtime, just to process and be on their own. But sometimes some of those limits will have to be set, to work through something. But for the most part, if we're in a romantic relationship, again, it's like with any relationship, whether you're with someone that's highly sensing or not, it's important for that communication to be established so that each person feels heard and understood to the extent possible. They're not going to, if you're in a relationship with someone who's not highly sensing, and you're not going to get each other's viewpoints 100%. You're not going to be able to understand how that person can see things so differently from you, and vice versa. So it's important to recognize, what that other person might be going through, even if you can't go there because you would never experience it that way. But having that, that ability and willingness to engage in that conversation and say, hey, I don't know this from your side. Can you help me understand what it's like for you? And then you can do the same thing. And then within those dynamics, that's a communication style thing that we're not getting into today so much, but in terms of boundaries, when we have certain needs that we don't feel are being met in a relationship, we do first have to make them apparent. We can't just assume that the person's going to know what we need. We have to share that with someone in a way that can be heard. And then if it's not changing, or if it's just a situation that's just not workable for you, then we need, then it's time to set a boundary and say, okay, this does not work for me. What can we do instead? And then you have that conversation. And then if it's still not happening, then you might have to, make a plan for, again, like, okay, we're not going to talk about this topic related to this. I understand how this is, going to come to, we're going to just butt heads on this. So we have to figure out ways to agree to disagree. And all relationships are like that at times. So being sure that what your needs are, voicing those, and then establishing whatever that boundary is. You're like, okay, yes, but when we talk about this, it is not okay if you say these words, because I feel that you're yelling at me, or I feel judged, or I feel whatever. And you say this word or this way of interacting is not working for me. So I need this to be different. And you set that boundary, and then you work through, what that looks like. But being very clear what those needs are, and then being willing to have the other person be frustrated or confused or whatever, and then have that conversation so that you can maintain that boundary and not back off just to make peace in the relationship, because that will not sustain. And if you're in a relationship like that right now, then that, you you work through something for a little bit and like, okay, I'm just going to leave it and not deal with it anymore. And then maybe it, kind of smooths over a little bit, but then it's going to resurface, right? So being aware and setting those boundaries and saying, yeah, this is what I need. So if we're talking about other relationship family-wise, and look at parents and kids. So really, really important. I mean, basic parenting, right? You set a limit and you need to follow through. We all pretty much know whether that's a big struggle or not. We know that that's kind of where we need to go, right? You set a limit and you follow through on that limit. And kids need limits, right? They need to not have everything completely free flowing, and they need to be able to learn how to manage limits. And so as a parent, it's important for you to recognize what your own personal boundaries are within the relationship with your child, to say it's not okay to speak to me in this way, or to say these words, or to do these things. And those have to be very obvious. And, you have to explain that the child has to know exactly what, no guessing. They have to know what's what. And then it's important for you to maintain those boundaries so that you show respect for yourself, and then your children will have respect for you because you're able to say, you know what? Nope, that's not okay. I understand that you were angry, but it's not okay to yell at me. So here's the repercussions of that. And you follow through with that, even if they're very upset, even if they're going to be, maybe they're going to yell at you. Maybe they're going to tell you things that those horrible words that you don't want to hear, that just come out in anger. Whatever those are, though, being able to stick with it and say, yep, but this is my boundary. And they will learn by, going through that experience that you mean what you say, and that you care about yourself enough, you honor yourself enough to have these boundaries and not let them walk all over you. So that can be really challenging for especially a highly sensing parent who has a non-highly sensing child who, that might be really triggering for you, and all of these behaviors that you would never, maybe you didn't exhibit when you were a child, and you can't understand where these are coming from. And it's a real challenge for you to be thinking, I don't want them to be upset with me. I don't want them to be angry. And those things are going to happen. So just recognizing that and giving permission for them to not be okay with you 100% of the time. And they'll move through that, right? But if you maintain those boundaries, then the relationship with them will be so much more solid, and they will learn to respect you because you're respecting not only them, but you as well. So what have I not discussed today? Oh, yes. So, and then of course we have friendships. I didn't mention friendships, but similar to romantic, relationships, when we have a choice of who we're going to be friends with or not, right? So if we are with someone and we really, like them for the most part, but we just, again, feel totally drained every time that we're with them, or we feel like we're not really heard or understood because it's all about them. Or in my previous example, it's like they just have to talk and talk and talk, and they're not there for you at all. So of course we can present things and our needs and set boundaries and say, oh, you know what, this isn't working for me. This is what I need. Can we work through this? Because what I see is this, or, this is my experience when this happens, and kind of try to work through all of that kind of stuff. And if that works, great. Usually it's, a person saying, oh, right, I didn't see it that way, or didn't realize it affected you that way. Got it. Okay. And then you work through something. Great. Sometimes it's just not going to happen. And there are those folks. I mean, a few years ago, I had to fire, if you will, a friend. I had to say, no, this isn't working for me because I've asked for this and this and this, and I keep getting these things, and it's just not working. And it was super, super hard for me to do that. Especially it was like during COVID time, and I was, concerned about, that person having one fewer contact during this lockdown situation, et cetera. So it was really challenging to even consider doing that. But the second I did that, I immediately felt this relief and confirmation that, yeah, that's what I had to do. Even if that person was going to be, upset, disappointed, frustrated, whatever, hurt even, I did it in a very gentle way and just said, this is what I need for me. And it's not working otherwise. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to say goodbye. So We can work through a lot of things with our friendships. And then sometimes, and sometimes we've had friends for a long, long time and dynamics shift. We all grow and evolve in different ways. And sometimes that just starts to not work. So sometimes we just need to say, you know what, this isn't working for me. I just need to move on. So being aware of that. So the last thing I want to throw in, though, is that if you are not used to setting any kind of boundaries or sticking with them, maybe you set them, but then you retract because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Or you maybe you do okay with some, but not with certain people or whatever. If you start to set these boundaries and actually maintain them, you say, this is not going to work for me. This is what I need. And then they do it and you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go there. And then you don't join them, or whatever the situation, but you honor that boundary and you stick with it. There is a very strong likelihood that you're going to get some backlash. So it's important to recognize that, because if you automatically change the dynamics by setting a boundary, because someone is used to you doing things in a certain way and suddenly you're not, or you're not okay with certain behaviors or comments or whatever, and that will automatically change things. So that person is going to be kind of thrown off at first in some way. So it is possible that you'll get some backlash from that. They might be angry. They might, say things that aren't nice. They might, stop calling for a while or whatever it is. We have to be, aware of that and ready for that discomfort of someone having that bit of backlash, and just being aware and knowing that it doesn't mean that your boundary is not okay. It just means that you've shaken things up, and it's going to take time for that person to recalibrate as well. You've been thinking about this for a long time, especially as a highly sensing person. You've really been thinking about this for a long time. So by the time you present that to someone, it's a surprise to them, right? And especially if it's a behavior, they do this and then you just don't say anything, and suddenly they do this and now you say something, and then you make that boundary, and then they're going, well, wait a second, this isn't easy anymore. Now I have to do things differently. So it can take some time. So just being aware of that, it does not mean that it's not okay to stick with that boundary. So I was going to take you through a little visualization exercise, but I talked more than I was planning today. So on your own, though, if you want to just, get quiet and kind of, do some grounding, and then just spend some time visualizing yourself saying no in a variety of situations with different people that you can practice at first with someone. Just theoretically just make up a person and say, okay, I'm just going to see there's this person in front of me. I'm just going to visualize myself saying no. And then pick people that are in your life that you might have a challenge with setting those boundaries, and just, being really paying attention to your breath, staying really calm, and just visualizing, okay, here's me saying no, and then seeing what happens. And you can visualize, maybe you can see someone being frustrated, and then you allow them to do that and move on and say, oh yeah, see, I'm okay still. It's all right. And then you can see some in which case, things go really well. So you can practice that just kind of through that visualization process of just getting your body used to, your mind used to the idea that this can be good and this can work. So I would recommend doing that. Sorry, I didn't have enough time to do that with you today, but that could be very helpful. So thank you for being here as always. And if you're ever just, feeling like this is really a struggle and these are great ideas, but you need a little bit more, feel free to reach out. I do still work with folks one-on-one, and have some programs available, and just feel free to reach out if you do need just that extra little bit. And I will see you again here next week, and we will have a guest on our show to talk about energetic boundaries. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.